Welcome to another Facebook Live. Actually, this is the last one that we're going to be doing on Facebook. We're going to move it over to Zoom. So for me, my first Zoom video with everybody will be on Friday. And the topic for that is pacing your race and lactic acid management. So for those of you that are looking at doing some racing this summer, or just want to do a better job with pacing your workouts, that's a video that you'll want to watch. So that's going to be on Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern, and that will be my first venture into Zoom. So please join me by joining the basic membership at Paddle Monster. Today what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk to you about training, and I wanted to talk about the idea of marker workouts, time controls, and testing, okay? So just before I get into each of those things, I thought I'd tell just a quick story about the training that I started to do for sprint canoe when I was only 16, and that put me in the right direction, so that by 18 I was a junior world champion. I was also fifth at the world championships, and then that just helped me each year get better and better until I was able to actually stand on the podium. So my coach was a very good coach, and the training program that he had me and the paddlers I was training with in my training group doing had workouts that repeated. And so they didn't repeat day to day to day. We had a different training. First of all, we trained 10 times a week on the water in the summer, and then we had supplementary strength or land-based work, cardio work as well. But the work that we did on the water 10 times a week, we'd have a different workout each day, but those workouts repeated week after week after week. And at one point, I was working with a different coach when I was involved in a national team project, and that coach kind of scoffed at the programs that I was on, thinking that they were unoriginal and that they were boring because the workouts repeated. And I couldn't imagine anything further from the truth. And to this day, I will insist that it's far better to repeat sessions than to always try to come up with something that's different. Okay, and for a few reasons. The first is that we're not in kindergarten, right? We have longer attention spans than that. And we don't need to have something different every single workout throughout the entire season to keep us interested in training, or at least we shouldn't, right? As athletes, we're goal driven. We set goals, we set long-term goals that, the duration of which is like a season, or sometimes if you use the example of Olympic athletes, they're like 4-year goals, right? They cover a whole 4-year Olympic cycle. But you set goals. And if you have a long-term goal, then you've got something that you're working towards every single day. That drives you, that motivates you, that helps you get up out of bed in the morning and get on the water. No matter how tired you are, no matter how crappy the weather is, that's what pushes you. And so if you're motivated by a goal like that, which you should be if you're an athlete and if you're trying to achieve something worthwhile, then you really shouldn't need to have something, your program be entertaining to keep you interested and engaged in your training. The second reason I think it was unnecessary to have different training sessions every workout throughout the year is that I think it's actually beneficial to repeat workouts. One of the things that you'll find if you're training with me in Paddle Monster is that I actually repeat a lot of my workouts week after week after week. And there's a rationale for that. The first time you do something, whether it's a race, whether it's a particular training session, doesn't matter which one it is, there's learning that occurs. And even the second and third and fourth time you do it, there should be learning that occurs as well. But that first time you do it, because you've never done it before, there's some uncertainty about how to pace it, about how hard to go. It's not uncommon that people go cautiously in the first time that they do a workout because they're concerned about being able to finish the whole thing. The second time you do it, you have an understanding of what pacing you could be doing or should be doing, and you do a better job of pacing it. So you realize that, hey, I could have gone a little harder early in the workout, got more out of it, and still had the energy to finish. So that learning effect doesn't occur if you're constantly coming up with new training sessions. If you only ever do a training session once, you never really get to apply the lessons that you learned the first time you tried to do it to the next time, and the time after that, and the time after that. And that learning effect allows you to do the workouts better so that you get more out of them. And the other thing that it does is if it teaches you the very fact that it teaches you to learn is beneficial. Because if you do enough different sessions and are learning each time you do them, and so that the next time you do that session, it's better. And then you do a different session and you learn, and then the next time you do it, it's better. If you're constantly learning and improving like that, it carries over, it teaches you a skill, which is better understanding what's involved in a particular session or a particular race distance, knowing how to learn from it. And even if you haven't done that particular training session before, or you haven't done a race of that distance before, you can extrapolate on the experiences that you've had from the workouts that you've done, and you have a better chance of nailing that new workout or that new race distance the first time you do it, right? But those things don't happen if you don't go through the experience of doing a workout, coming in after you've finished, reflecting on it, thinking about what went well, what you maybe could have done better, developing a plan based on that to do it better the next time, then going out, making sure that you do it better, and coming back in, reflecting again, making note of how you improved, and then you're still looking for things that you could do better. And that constant learning is not only making you improve more quickly, but it's teaching you how to, if you're covering all the bases in your workouts, it's teaching you how to better predict how to approach a workout that you may not have seen before, based on all of the different experiences that you have in your training and the learning that's going on as you do those workouts. Okay, I hope I'm making that clear, that it's actually beneficial to repeat sessions. Now, you don't want to repeat these sessions all year. If you're doing a properly periodized training program, a periodized training program means it's broken into different blocks and phases throughout the year, and in each block or phase, you're working towards different objectives. So in the programs that I'm writing, generally a training block is 14 to 16 weeks, and it's broken into a couple or three different phases. And the first phase might be 6 to 7 weeks, and it's the focus is accumulation. So development of aerobic base, lots of long distance paddling or longer distance paddling, lower intensity, level 2, level 3. Developing just a low-level aerobic base that you can then build higher-level aerobic abilities on, and you can build your anaerobic abilities on when the program intensifies. So a 6 to 7, say, week accumulation phase, focusing on aerobic base, and then intensification for another 6 or 7 or 8 week phase, where you're working on higher level aerobic ability, so like anaerobic threshold type aerobic work, anaerobic work, and even neuromuscular work, where you're doing short bursts that are alactic, actually, not using even the same energy system that you use for most anaerobic work. And you're focusing purely on recruiting muscle fibers to the task of paddling very, very aggressively. And so those types of trainings in each of those phases are totally different. And so you wouldn't necessarily repeat a training session that you do in an accumulation phase into the intensification phase. You'd be then repeating different types of training sessions. The other thing that I'd like to do is I like to keep the structure of a workout the same, but make small tweaks or adjustments to that workout throughout a training phase, so that the basic structure is the same, the workout looks the same, but there are small tweaks to it, either in the amount of work at level 2 or level 3. So small increases of intensity or small increases of volume, so that I'm constantly challenging the paddler to go a little bit more, to do a little bit more. But it's the structure of the workout is the same, and the learning that you did the previous week can carry over into the new week. It's just the small tweaks add a little bit of difference to it, but because the structure is basically the same, that learning effect carries over. So, to that coach that long ago told me that my coach's programs were rubbish because there was no variety, I would, with the experience I have now as a coach and as many years as an athlete, I would sit down and have a nice conversation and debate that with him. At the time, I just thankfully was intelligent enough to sort of stay with the program that my coach was writing, because I did have confidence in him, and it did me very well as an athlete from basically 1978 to 1988. And then he stopped coaching to spend more time with his family, and we continued to remain friends, and he was a guy that I could turn to for advice. But then I got a new coach, and his coaching was very, very similar in many ways, but different in some ways too, and that was really good because it provided me with some new stimulus. So that's the basis of why you would like to repeat workouts. Another reason that you want to repeat workouts is that there are certain types of workouts that you do that provide you with really important information. And we call those workouts marker workouts, okay? They are markers or indicators of your progress or in the state of your training at any given point. And unlike the workouts that I prescribe, where I make small tweaks or adjustments to those workouts, throughout a training phase, marker workouts shouldn't change. They should be the same each time, because you're using them to gather data. And if you're gathering data, then the work should be the same from each time that you do it, so that the data is meaningful. Because if you're changing the work, then it's changing the effect in your body, and you collect the data, but the data isn't. It's like you're looking at data now for an apple and data for an orange. If you're changing the workout dramatically, if you're changing it a little bit, it's maybe still an apple, but it's a different kind of apple. It might be a Macintosh instead of a Fiji or something like that. So, you're a Granny Smith. You are not doing things identically the same. So it becomes difficult to get to compare the data. And the reason you want to collect data in your training is to measure your progress, to measure your improvement, to measure the effectiveness of the training that you've been doing, to see if it's meeting the requirements that you have to continually advance and improve. I think we all have an understanding that improvement when you start to train is very rapid. The improvement curve is very steep, and then it starts to level off, right? The better you get, the harder it is to continue to improve. But you should still be able to continue to improve. And if the program is well balanced and well periodized, and if it does have built-in recovery weeks so that you can work harder, and then back off just a little bit to give your body a chance to recover, to consolidate gains you've made, and then go harder and harder again, you can almost build up in steps. Like you can start here in week 1, week 2, maybe week 3, or maybe week 3 is a recovery week where it's a little bit easier, and then week 4 is a little bit harder still, week 5 is a little bit harder still, then you might have a recovery week, but then you keep climbing and advancing with the work that you're doing, and in theory, the gains that you're making are climbing and improving too. So you're constantly getting better, you're constantly improving. And even if you're an experienced athlete, though those improvements may be small, they're still there. And so you do your marker workouts to collect data to tell you, in fact, whether you're improving or not, okay? So a marker workout should be a workout that is the same every time that you do it, and that you can get some type of quantifiable information from that indicates whether you're actually improving or not. That quantifiable information could be related to, heart rate. It could be related to time. It could be if you've got a sports scientist following you around, you know, they can take lactate and things like that, and then look at your physiological response to training. Is that changing? Is that improving? That's a bit of a stretch. Interesting digression. I never had that as a sprint canoe athlete in all the years that I was on the national team. I did find some photos recently. I'm going to post them on Instagram of being tested, you know, poked and prodded with and doing a VO2 max test in a on a treadmill and in a canoe with an airbag that collected all the air I exhaled, and then it was put into an analyzer to see what my VO2 max was. That was in 1980. But when we did those tests when I was on the national team, it was always for the tester, not the athlete being tested. It was always somebody who was doing their university thesis and needed guinea pigs to collect data, you know, for their experiment so that they could, you know, write their thesis. And we always would volunteer. We would get some information from it. We would get an interpretation of what the results meant. But really, testing is only useful if you're constantly repeating it so that you can measure your improvement and monitor your progress, right? And now, some of the countries that we competed against had that kind of support. Remember racing in East Germany and seeing scientists in white lab coats following the athletes around, collecting blood. And so, you know, it happens more now, and it happens with professional sport teams all the time. But for those of us in a sport like stand-up paddling, even the pros, this really isn't happening. And so we need to do our testing in a way that allows us to collect data like, for example, time, like just measure our performance and see if we're improving. And so to that end, I want to talk about a special type of marker workout called the time control. And a time control is probably the easiest marker workout you can do. And basically what you're doing is you're doing a set distance that you will repeat time and again through a cycle, a training phase. And you're seeing how fast you can cover that time. And so a lot of people will call that a time trial. The reason we call it a time control in a sprint canoe background is that the control word comes from the fact that we're trying to control the conditions. We're trying to set up this time trial in conditions that are repeatable each time you do it, so that you again end up collecting the data and you're comparing an apple and an apple and an apple and an apple when you look at all the results. You're not comparing apples and oranges or lemons. If you do your time trials in drastically different conditions from week to week to week, or each time you do them, the results become less meaningful, because we are in a sport that is affected by conditions. Wind, waves, current, they all play a big part in how fast we might be able to do a given distance, say a 5K or 2K. And so the idea is to pick, if you're going to do time controls, to pick a patch of water that is minimally affected by conditions. So it's generally pretty sheltered, so that even if the wind's blowing, it's not affecting the conditions on the water much. There's not a lot of wind, there's not a lot of wave chop, it's pretty flat. You try to pick a patch of water where there isn't much current. And certainly if there is a little bit of current, that it's consistent from time to time to time. So, you know, like a river with a slow moving current might be acceptable. That's where I did a lot of my training. You're still going to have days where you get a lot of rain or something like that, and the current really nukes for a few days, but it will return to normal. Tidal conditions are more challenging because they're changing. It's a much more dynamic environment. The conditions are, you know, the tide's going in, and then it ebbs for a bit, and then it comes back out, and then it's constantly changing. It's a really dynamic environment. So tidal water would be a little bit more difficult to do this in. You'd have to look at the tide charts and know what the tide was, and then of course you'd have to find a sheltered area where it was less affected by wind and waves. But again, the reason you want to do things in these controlled conditions is ideally you'd like the conditions to be repeatable each time you do it, so that the data that you collect means more to you, right? Like, you're not measuring how strong the wind was on a given day that you did the test. You're actually measuring how strong you were on the day that you did the test. Okay? So that's where we get the word time control from, is that it's not just a time trial, but it's a time trial done in controllable conditions where we can better get an idea on how we're performing rather than what the impact on our performance was of the external conditions. So the time controls I like to do are 2K and 5K. I find them really meaningful. 5K is long enough that it's a very good indicator of how fast or how fit you are for doing typical SUP race distances. So the pace that you do for a 5K, surprisingly, isn't going to be a whole lot faster than the pace that you'll end up doing for a 10K. And the degree to which it is, it's doing a really good job of measuring the fitness that you need for a 10K, a 15K, a 20K. A 2K is a higher intensity time control. You're going faster. You can sustain a faster pace for 2K than 5K, more than you can sustain a faster pace for 5K than 10K, if that makes sense. And so the 2K, it measures a little bit more of your really high level aerobic ability, like your aerobic power. And it can also have a little bit more of an anaerobic impact, measure your anaerobic fitness. It's still long for anaerobic because it's going to take anywhere from 11 and a bit minutes to 15 minutes, depending on how fast you are. But it's entirely different than doing a 5K, which is going to be high 20 minutes, like 28, 29, 30, or over 30, right? Depending on how fast you are. So, but those are the two distances that they're my go-to distances for SUP. For sprint canoe, we used to do the odd 5K one early in the season, but we really focused on 2K and then the race distances, 1,000 meters, 500 meters, and even 200 meters. And we would do them, we would repeat them to collect data. And then also, of course, as I mentioned at the top here, when you're repeating workouts, you're learning, right? And it's really important to learn your race distance because, that's your race. So you can imagine that a sprint canoe athlete repeating race distance time controls, the learning effect would be really important, right? What you learn about your pacing in a 1,000-meter time control would be directly applicable to your 1,000-meter race. And the more experience you had at pacing, and the more you were able to assess your performance from time control to time control to time control. Maybe trying different things in your approach to doing it each time too, like being more aggressive at the start, or trying to do even splits the whole way, or trying to go a little slower and really finish hard in the last 500 meters. You could try these different approaches, and then you could actually learn from which one was most successful for you, and that could help your pacing on race day. So, so again, time controls are marker workouts that are specific to they're like a distance, a specific distance. It could be race distance, and for SUP it's probably shorter than race distance, but it's a set distance that you can do again and again and again in your training, and not only learn from, but collect valuable information that is telling you, giving you indications on the effect of your training. Is it doing what you want it to do? Is it helping you improve the way you need to improve? It provides you with that learning opportunity. Okay, and then the last thing is that I would just talk about is testing. And so obviously, the role of testing and training is the same thing. If you think about it, really, the time controls are tests, right? Races are tests, and obviously, most people have a priority race that they're training for during the year. If you come from Olympic sport, you're training obviously for the Olympics every 4 years, or you're training for like a world championship in a non-Olympic year. You might have other important events like World Cups throughout the season, but they're as important as they are. They're preparing you for that ultimate race of the year, the World Championships. You have selection races that are important too, right? Because you don't get to race at the World Championships if you aren't successful at the selections. CEP is a little bit different because there's so many more events throughout the year in a non-pandemic year. So people have, it's tempting to want to race hard every weekend and be at your top level every weekend or every time you go out and race. That's hard to do. And ultimately, I recommend against that. And I suggest that people pick a few priority events throughout the year that are most meaningful to them, and we'll focus on them and prepare, optimally for them, so that you are ready to give your very, very best performance you can possibly give in those races that you've identified as priorities. The other events, it's not that you don't want to do well in them, but you can't peak for every single event, or the peak that you have at your main event is going to be a lower level peak, right? You want that to be as high a peak as possible. So these other events have to be, you will not be as optimally prepared for them as you are for that main one. You have to accept that. And you have to actually treat some of these other races through the year as learning events, as tests, as training events, basically, where you're going out, just like in time controls, you're trying different things and different strategies, different tactics, and learning from them and helping them or using them to help you progress towards your main goal. If you're, it's a long year and there's races all year and stuff, so you could have some priority events, over here in the spring, maybe one in midsummer, and then one like in the fall, like at Chattajack or something like that, that's in October. And so you can have more than one priority event a year. You'll recall when I talked about the periodization of a training program, you can break the year into 14 to 16 week blocks, and so you can have like a sort of a main peaking event at the end of each block, but you really can't have a priority event every weekend, because when that starts to happen, it's very difficult to plan the program and have you do the work that's going to lead to that superior performance when it matters most. But testing. Obviously, time controls are testing. Some races, like lower priority races, can be used as testing. But there's also other tests that you can use in training. And if you're looking for just indicators of just your fitness, just your non-specific, like your non-paddling fitness, your general fitness, that has a huge impact on what you end up being able to bring to the board, to the water, you can do tests like running tests. So we used to do a 5K run test. We used to do a 1,500 meter run test, which was, like sub 4 minute, or at a world class level. For me, it was just over 4 minutes. But that's kind of in the range of 1,000 meters on the water in C1, which was right around 4 minutes, just under 4 minutes. So that was a good test for somebody who was racing 1,000 meter C1. We used to do swimming tests. We used to do some strength tests in the gym, bench press, bench pull, max tests, but also tests that were a percentage of your body weight and then how many reps you could do. And then more recently, when I was coaching, Chris Chapman, our Paddle Monster strength coach, had our national team guys doing tests where they were like power tests. So they would do a max, and then they would figure out what percentage of their max, the test would be done at a prescribed percentage of their max. So they would figure out what weight they needed to use. And then they would do 1 rep a second of a bench pull, for example. And they would see how long they could do that 1 rep a second. And he had a little machine that would measure the force or the speed at which they were doing their lift, which is an expression of power, because power is force against time. And so it was a power test. And that was remember when I talked about having scientists follow you around in lab coats? Well, Chris wasn't wearing a lab coat there, but that was much more of a science-based test than the test that I ever did as a national team athlete many years before that, and more so than anyone I think can expect to be doing in CEP, because you don't have access to the gizmo that's measuring that power output. But testing is an important thing. So if you're building your own program, you want to build in some testing to, again, all you're doing is you're basically monitoring your progress. You want to see that you're always improving. You want to know if you're plateauing. You want to know, certainly you want to know if you're declining, because then you need to change things up in your program, or maybe you need some rest, maybe you need to back off, you know, so it just allows you to make more informed decisions about your training, okay? So that's marker workouts, time controls, and testing. And the reason I think this was an appropriate topic to talk about today, and it wasn't one that anyone requested, is because Paddle Monster and Sup Racer have got together, and we're launching at the end of this week a virtual paddle league, which is a global series of time trials and dream races, where you get to go out and do lay down a time in a time trial, following some guidelines, rules for each distance, and then you get to post your time to a live leaderboard and compare it against paddlers from all around the world who are doing this. We want to have like our leaderboard to basically be a virtual world rankings for each distance. And we're going to start with a 5K, and so it starts this week on the 7th. You can register now, but each month there'll be a couple of different events that we launch. We're looking at having a bunch of different distances, like 5K, a half marathon, 21K, King of the Kilometer for 1K, 2K race, 500 meters, 200 meters, and then we've got some dream events coming up too. We've got some pros. Connor is one of them, who's going to go out and lay down a time, and then we're going to get other people to do their time, and we're going to see if Connor can catch you or not. And so your whole idea is run from Connor, don't let him catch you. So there's all kinds of exciting things that we're doing. Basically, what you're doing is you're doing time trials, and you can do these time trials. These leaderboards are open for a lot of the events, not all of them, but a lot of the events are open all year. So you can start now. You can do your first time in May, and you know, if you think you can do better, and you're doing time controls in your training, and you find that you do another one, a better one, you can submit that time. You don't have to be left with one time. You don't have to re-enter to submit another time. Your entry allows you to submit times throughout the season, so you can post as often as you want based on the performances that you're doing in your time trials, and then see how you stack up against people around the world, people your own age, people your own gender. You know, you get to race people that you would never virtually race, people that you would never get otherwise get a chance to do. And then you get to talk trash about it in the Virtual Paddle League Clubhouse, which is a Facebook group that we have, where you can go on and talk about the time you did or the time that somebody else did, and find out you know, what equipment they were riding compared to you, and what conditions they were in. And you can challenge your friend to do it and see if they can beat your time. There's all kinds of fun things that we can do with this. So I thought it would be appropriate to talk about the role of time trials and training today, because it dovetails nicely with this virtual paddle league that's launching as a joint venture between Sup Racer and Paddle Monster. So we're really excited about it, and we hope you join us in that. We know it's a year where there are all the traditional races, at least early in the year, haven't happened because of the pandemic, and yet, you know, many people are on the water, and more are getting on the water daily as lockdowns end and the weather gets nicer. So the opportunity is there for you to go out and paddle hard. You're just paddling hard alone to be part of a group, you know, that's worldwide, but you know, we're how would I? John said it. We're apart but together, right? So hopefully you join us in that. Last thing I want to do is I want to give a shout out to somebody. Kim Colbell was at our training camp in West Palm Beach, or not West Palm Beach, Port Pierce, this March. She was in the March group, And she blew us away because we made shirts for all the people at our training camp, and we gave them shirts as part of their participation. But Kim showed up with her own shirt. She made her own shirt for the camp, and she made me one. So this is not the official Paddle Monster shirt for the camp that we gave out. This is one that she made for the camp, and she was wearing one day, and we saw it, and it blew us away that she had thought to make a shirt for the camp all on her own. And so she made me one, and it just arrived today, Kim. So if you're watching, it finally arrived. Thank you. I love it. And I thought I'd wear it today for the video as a shout out to you, and thank you again. Friday, I'm going to be at 3 p.m. I'm going to be on Zoom this time. I'm hoping that you'll join me. We're talking about, it dovetails a little bit with what we talked about today, where we're talking about time trials and time controls and learning from your performance in those, and using that learning as a way to continue to improve, looking at ways you can pace your time control better. And then it also dovetails nicely with the fact that the 5K is going to be open in the virtual paddle league. So that the topic I want to do on Friday is pacing your race, lactic acid management, because so much of it comes down to how well you're able to manage your lactate level. I've likened, and I'll talk more about this obviously on Friday, but I've likened racing in CSEP to a video game. I won't tell you any more about it now, but I'll elaborate on that analogy on Friday. So I hope you join me, and I'm looking forward to that. Everybody keep well. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope to see you on Friday, and I hope to see your name on the leaderboard with mine and lots of other people's in the virtual paddle league. Okay, all the best, and I will see you again soon.